The countdown is on. There's only 2 days until the Simpsons secret is out. Make sure you get your copy today and the link is in the description below. Comic Book Guy is a man of very high standards.
The worst episode ever.
And I'm damn well sure he would like to be taken a lot more seriously in Springfield, and this channel for that matter. He is a businessman, a criminal, and Moe's first kiss. So today we will strip back the catchphrases and the impersonal name of simple comic book guy and instead delve into his tragic backstory and his remarkably varied love life. So how did this sarcastic geek finally marry his Wonder Woman? Well, you know what to do. Sit back and enjoy the complete timeline of Comic Book Guy.
And sip.
By the way, if you love timeline videos, then check out my other channel, Screen Portal. You'll be transported through the screen and into the lives of others, including Futurama, Family Guy, and South Park. So go on and check it out after this video. The link is in the description below. Early life and family. Did you know that Comic Book Guy grew up in a wealthy family? He was an only child born as Jeff Albertson, and we know his father only by the name Postage Stamp Fellow. And as you can probably guess by his name, he was born into a family who were collectors of oddities. But even though these guys loved possessions, they didn't have a whole lot of love for each other. And that was just what young Jeffrey wanted more than anything. So much so that Jeff passed his lonely days playing baseball in the hope that his father would watch him play in a big game. But during the biggest moment of his life, his father was nowhere to be seen. Too heartbroken to play well, his teammates dumped him in the trash, where a truck filled with comic books were also being discarded. And so began his discovery of the rabbit hole that is comic books, escaping his sadness by hiding in the pages of spandex-clad superheroes, and so becoming Comic Book Guy. And it's not just his love for comic books that would come to light. His first kiss came around too, accidentally locking lips with Moe Szyslak. And ironically, he does actually have a cousin called Comic Book Gay.
Most insidious stereotype ever.
Comic Book Guy's adulthood. Comic Book Guy left his family behind and went to college, getting a degree in chemical engineering. And he's a clever guy too, with an IQ of 170. This could also reason how he achieved a master's in folklore and mythology too. After his studies, he then travelled to Springfield, where he set up his own comic book store, the Android's Dungeon and baseball card shop. This combined his two biggest passions, baseball and comic books. These were of course the only two things that ever gave him happiness as a child. The store is his fortress of solitude and so fills the missing part of himself with mint collection collectibles. Here he is king and uses power and his shop to lord over whoever he wants.
Oh, customers, how I hate them.
Fun fact, did you know that Matt Groening based Comic Book Guy on a clerk at the Los Angeles Amok bookstore? And in his own words, he said that the guy used to sit on a high stool, kind of lording over the store with a supercilious attitude. Yeah, that sounds like Jeff. Now, Jeff takes great delight in insulting his customers and will eagerly place anyone who crosses him on his banned for life wall, including Simpsons creator himself, Matt Groening. But his sarky banter would eventually drive him out of business, as everyone chose to go to the much friendlier comic book store across the road, run by a guy called Milo. You know, the one that wouldn't happily berate and rip his customers off and wouldn't make kids really miserable. Overcome with jealousy, Comic Book Guy tries to bribe the children with ninja weapons, but when that doesn't work, he cuts everything up with his samurai sword, leading to some famed writers including Alan Moore to beat him up. Defeated, he was forced to close up and hand his keys over to Marge Simpson and her women's gym. But don't worry, eventually Jeff did get his beloved store back and reopened. And you'd think that he would have learned some lessons from all of this, but no, he still treats his customers like crap.
Very well, I must hurry back to my comic book store where I dispense the insults rather than absorb them.
Although you may be thinking that he's hiding a low intellect behind a wall of snark, he is actually very smart. He's got an IQ of 170 and the average being in the US, just 98. As one of the smartest people in a town of dum-dums, he was a member of Springfield's Mensa, a group of highly intelligent minds consisting of Principal Skinner, Dr. Hibbert, Professor Frink, Lindsay, and eventually Lisa. Being the smartest group in town, they briefly took over as mayor and ran Springfield. At first, everything seemed great, with each of them using their talents to make the town a better place. However, it all started to fall apart when each member selfishly chose to pass laws on their own, without consulting the others. And Comic Book Guy, for example, enacted the Vulcan tradition of breeding only once every 7 years.
For many of you, this will mean much less breeding. For me, much, much more.
Their infighting led to the breakup of the group, and so Jeff went back to his shop. It seems like getting a little bit of power really does go to Comic Book Guy's head. Seeing as Jeff had pretty much read every single comic book, it was only natural that he would write his own. And so he created a comic series called Every Man, which is about an overweight delivery man who can absorb superpowers from comic books. And it was a huge success, and soon enough he was approached to make it into a movie. But of course the studio wanted a Hollywood hunk, but he wanted a dumpy average everyman for the role, which is typical seeing as the series was called Every Man. And so Homer Simpson starred as the lead.
You are acceptable.
But the film's production was an absolute nightmare, with Homer's weight fluctuating radically. The producers knew they had a real stinker on their hands, so they offered Comic Book Guy the chance to direct the sequel, on the condition that he gave the movie a glowing review. Although this still would have made him a millionaire, he refused.
The worst movie ever!
He's a guy that stands by his morals and really does say what he thinks, so kudos, man. Comic Book Guy and finding love. Although he seemingly prefers his own company, mostly because no one wants to hang out with him, he is, in fact, very lonely.
Is there a word in Klingon for loneliness?
He was married at one point in a role-playing game and even considered digital children, but that would have severely drained his power crystals. He would get married again, but this time in real life, to Mindy Simmons, the smoking redhead who almost got in between Homer and Marge. They were wed in a mass marriage when a cult took over Springfield, and although Jeff hit the jackpot, Otto and Barney weren't as lucky.
Hey, remember our agreement? I'm the man.
You're the man!
But seeing as the cult leader was a bit of a sham, the marriage most likely was too. Sorry, Jeff. It also looked like that he may have found the one during a comic convention, but when she asked him to clean the sweet tarts out of his beard, that was way too far. He would finally find love again in the wrinkly arms of Agnes Skinner, who was about 30 years his senior. The two bonded over their contempt for everyone and everything, taking joy in ruining everyone else's day.
And we're always finishing each other's insults.
But their romance was short-lived, as when his secret backroom full of illegal videotapes were discovered by the police, he was arrested, and Agnes wasn't about to wait around.
My bones are half dust.
And it seems like he had it out for Skinner, because after dating his mother, he moved on to Seymour's ex, Edna Krabappel. Much like Agnes, Edna was a strong-willed, no-nonsense woman, full of dry wit and sarcasm.
She is near mint and comes from a very limited edition. Females who will talk to me.
And of course, it wasn't long until he popped the question, because no one gets a second chance with Edna, and he asked her to marry him in a Klingon ceremony. But Skinner would crash the wedding dressed up as Catwoman.
No, they told me it was Catman.
The two would duel over her affections, but she interrupted their fight to declare that she will not marry either of them. Her reasoning for Comic Book Guy was that they were just too different, which is a fair point. And for a long time, it looked as though Comic Book Guy was destined for a life of loneliness forever, until their ears a cute Japanese girl walked into a store one day. Comic Book Guy gets married. When Jeff finds out this arch enemy Milo has gotten married, he feels lonelier than ever.
Nerds don't get girls.
These days they do, man.
After he realizes that he needs his own Lois Lane or MJ, a Japanese girl called Kumiko Nakamura entered the store. She was in town researching the saddest cities for her manga. Talented and pretty, Jeff is instantly smitten and plucked up the courage to ask her for a date.
Is it too soon to give you flowers in a Hulk hand?
Since Homer is the only fat guy he knows who married a hot lady, he asks for his sage advice. So the Simpsons accompany Jeff on his date, and Marge tells him to be on his best behavior, but he finds out that he cannot contain his bubbling sarcasm.
I cannot hide the snide inside.
But Kumiko actually found his brashness refreshing.
I'm in love, and yet still a little bitter.
But when her strict father finds out about their relationship, he takes her away. But Homer Simpson, who seems to be Jeff's best friend at this point, helped persuade Kumiko's father to change his mind. Realizing just how happy he made his daughter, his father gave his blessing to the pair. And the two got married by none other than his hero, Stan Lee.
Best day ever.
Now Kumiko and Jeff are such a cute couple, so much so that she even supports his pointless Saki rants.
I love your contempt for things that don't matter.
She has been a great influence on the formerly secluded shop owner, who once spent his days alone inside downloading Captain Janeway's nudes, but now went out and enjoyed life. She even did some kinky roleplay in the bedroom, dressing up as Jeff's ultimate fantasy, Greta the Sexy Gremlin from Gremlins 2. Each to their own, I guess. Jeff's happy life almost fell apart when his wife announced that she wanted to start a family, but Comic Book Guy had no interest in being a daddy, and it had nothing to do with his power crystals too. The thing is that Jeff actually adopted a Cambodian orphan named Prius when he got rich from his comic book Everyman, but knowing our man Comic Book Guy, he most likely shipped back to where he came from when he got bored, or wrapped him up in cellophane and stored him in his lair. Anyway, Kumiko arranges for her husband to attend a movie with the Simpsons, hoping Bart and Lisa will change his mind on parenthood. And surprisingly for him, he finds it truly enjoyable to introduce the kids to classic movies, realizing that he can pass his endless film knowledge down to others. And just when it looked like that he had changed his mind on being a dad, he found he could not offer any emotional support for Bart and Lisa when they got sad. Freaked out and afraid, he ran back to his childhood home. For the longest time, Jeff acted as though he had no father.
The closest thing I have to a father is the Obi-Wan doll in my store.
So years later, Jeff had to confront his real dad, and it was here that we find out why he didn't show up to that baseball game. It turns out that his father was out buying him an autographed baseball, as well as admitting that he did not want to go to the game, fearing he would not know how to react if his son lost. Now reconciled, they have a game of catch. With the baseball still in its glass case, of course, as it is a collector's item. Cured of his daddy issues, Jeff goes back to his wife, finally ready to be a father. So don't be surprised if these two have a child within the next few seasons. And so that completes the Comic Book Guy timeline in a neat little package. So I have just a few announcements. Thank you so much to everyone who entered the book giveaway on Instagram. I've randomly selected 3 people and have messaged them directly. If you want to get your hands on a copy of The Simpsons Secret, a cromulent guide to how The Simpsons predicted everything, then check out the link in the pinned comment. I am so proud how this book's turned out, and I really can't wait for you guys to read it. Also, just last week, I was recently on a podcast called Simpsons is Greater Than, and I had a great time discussing all things Simpsons, predictions, and collectors with Bart of Darkness, Instagram's biggest Simpsons collector. The link is in the description below. And finally, I'd like to say a big thank you to my Flying Hellfish members. We have Timothy, who else but Zane, Liam, One Drama Boy, Steve, Charlie, Sean, Stefan, Robert, Ashley, Glenford, Devin, Gadrak, Stephen, Edward, Anthony, Nicola, Jeffrey, Dominic, Cody, Jakku Star, GameBoss49, Chaz, Jeff, Gil, Shadu, Murray, Paul, Henry, Frank, Lucas Z, Omar, Eric, Thomas88, Dave, Samantha Rose, Rayleigh, Laurent, Daniel, Charlie, Brendan, Jessica, Shavendra, Holly, Jason, Molly, Jack, and Luca.